Every network called this a routine appearance. The backstage footage tells a completely different story. The tape was already rolling when Colbert reached under the desk. Nobody in the control room knew what was inside the case he removed. Not the senior producer, not the network's standards coordinator, who had been present for every taping that month, not the floor director, who would later say the first indication he had that something was different was the sound, or rather its absence, the way the studio lost its ambient texture in the moment the case was opened, as if the room itself had gone attentive. By the time Colbert placed the first item on the desk surface, Trump had already said the thing that the tape was about to disprove. But to understand the weight of that disproval, to understand why the crowd's reaction in the next 40 minutes was not the sound of an audience entertained, but the sound of an audience altered, you have to go back to the beginning of the evening, to the cold corridor outside Studio 54, where a floor manager stood checking his watch, and where Donald Trump arrived carrying 43 years of uncontested narrative, like luggage he had never once been asked to open. The Ed Sullivan Theater's control booth operates on a standard pre-show protocol that the technical crew has run so many times it has become autonomic. That night, the senior lighting director later noted he adjusted the desk key light 3 times in the final 20 minutes before the taping. Not because the levels were wrong technically, but because something about the setup felt too soft, too forgiving, and the instinct to correct it kept returning without a satisfying resolution. The stage had a particular quality of stillness, not the ordinary stillness of a studio between takes, but the stillness of a room in which the furniture has been arranged for a specific purpose, and the purpose has not yet declared itself. Stephen Colbert sat behind the desk with his hands flat on the surface and a case beside his water glass and an expression that contained nothing. Not anticipation, not calculation, just the specific absence of expression that belongs to someone who has already finished preparing and is now simply waiting for the clock. Trump arrived from the east entrance. His walk occupied the full width of the corridor. Each step was placed with the deliberate weight of someone who understands that the pace of a powerful man's entrance is itself a form of communication. Before the chair, he stopped. His hands found his jacket lapels and pulled once, a brief inventory of his own surfaces before he committed them to the room. He settled into the chair with the completeness of an object finding its center of gravity. Wide, certain, every inch of the available space accounted for and claimed. His eyes found Colbert and held there. The gaze was flat in the way that gaze is flat when its intention is to measure rather than to connect. When he spoke, his voice had the register of a man who has decided to be generous with his time. "You've been doing this show for how long now?" he said, addressing the question to the studio audience as much as to the host. "And you still can't fill the room the way I do just by walking in." The studio audience gave an uncertain sound. What followed occupied the next 11 minutes and would later be examined in frame-by-frame detail by 3 separate media analysis teams. Trump moved through his lines of attack with practiced efficiency. He told Colbert that the show's ratings were a historical artifact, that the Late Show existed in a state of managed decline, that only Trump's continued willingness to engage kept from becoming terminal. He moved to relevance. Without him, the content pipeline that sustained late-night television dried to a trickle, and every host in the format knew it and resented it and built their entire programming strategy around his existence while publicly pretending to oppose it. He made it personal with the ease of someone who has learned that the personal attack requires no construction, only delivery. A man, he said, whose cultural moment had passed, not cruelly, just factually, the way all moments pass. He arrived at the power claim with the fluency of long repetition. He ran rooms, he ran outcomes. He had never in his professional life sat across a desk or a podium or a debate stage and come away having lost the exchange. Not once, not ever. The record, he said, was clean. The record was unbroken. "I don't lose debates," he said. "I've never lost a debate. Anyone who tells you otherwise is working from a script that doesn't match the footage." A man in the 4th row looked straight ahead without blinking. Colbert had not moved. His hands had not moved. He had received every word at the same steady remove, and the steadiness was its own form of answer, not rebuttal, not engagement, but the patient refusal to be moved by something designed to move him. The silence after Trump's final sentence lasted long enough to become a presence. When Colbert spoke, his voice was lower than at any point in the broadcast. Not louder, precisely, clinically, lower. "Everything you just said," he said, "was designed to fill the room with noise, but facts don't care about volume." One beat. Then he reached for the case. He did not rush. He placed it on the desk the way a surgeon places the first instrument, without ceremony, without announcement, with the flat deliberateness of someone for whom ceremony would be redundant. What he removed was a standard external drive connected to the broadcast system. What appeared on the screen behind them was a video clip. Trump, at a private donor event in 2016, speaking in the specific register of a man who believes his audience is sealed. Not a campaign rally, not a debate, a closed gathering, a room of contributors, a setting in which the performed version of the man was not required because the audience was already his. He was speaking about the previous night's primary debate. He said, without decoration, without qualification, in the clipped and certain voice of a man delivering a private verdict, "That one didn't go the way I needed it to." The clip ran for 19 seconds. Colbert let it end. He looked at Trump without expression. "That's your voice," he said. "That's your event. That's your donor room. And that was 3 months before you told a national audience you'd never lost a debate." Trump's jaw shifted. His right hand, which had been resting loose on the armrest, tightened. He said the clip was taken out of context, that private conversations were always compressed and misrepresented by the people who chose to release them. Colbert looked at him. "The clip is certified unedited," he said. "We have the timestamp verification on file." A woman in the third row turned her head slightly, as if orienting herself by sound. Then Colbert reached under the desk. He brought up the case and removed a single-bound document. Not a folder, a document 3/4 of an inch thick with a tab system along the right edge. He placed it on the desk without opening it immediately. He described it. Post-debate internal assessments, not media analysis, internal. From the campaign's own research arm, covering 7 separate debate performances across 3 election cycles, commissioned, formatted, and distributed to senior staff. He named the document's provenance. He named the law firm that had verified its authenticity. He named the date it had been produced and the date it had been obtained. Trump's hand moved toward it. Not fast, not urgently. The reach of a man who expects access. Colbert's hand came down flat on the cover, not aggressive, simply prior. "We'll work through it together," he said. The camera caught the withdrawal of Trump's wrist. The front row caught it too. The woman in the aisle put the tips of her fingers against her lower lip and held them there. The screen behind them changed. A timeline. 7 performances. 7 dates. 7 internal assessment ratings from Trump's own campaign staff, displayed in the same format the documents used internally. A numeric scale, a categorical field, a notes column. 5 of the 7 carried assessments that used language ranging from below strategic target to recovery required to, in one entry, 2 words that the camera held on long enough for the third row to read without assistance. Colbert did not read them aloud. He let the screen carry them. Trump spoke over the timeline, his voice rising to cover the space the dates were occupying, building volume in the way that volume is built when the alternative is reading. Colbert slowed down. He spoke with more space between each word than the word before. "This is the architecture," he said, "not of what you lost, of what you built to make sure no one could measure it." He let it sit for one breath. "That's not confidence," he said. "That's architecture, constructed specifically to keep something standing that the record says should have fallen a long time ago." Nobody spoke for a moment the audience would later describe in terms of temperature rather than sound. The audio file was next. A recording, not broadcast quality, the specific texture of a device that was not placed intentionally, that captured what it captured because it was present rather than because it was positioned. A voice that required no introduction. Trump, post-debate, in what the forensic certification identified as a private vehicle, speaking to an unidentified companion in the clipped and unguarded tone of a man who has just finished performing and has not yet resumed his public register. The content was brief. He described a specific exchange from that evening's debate. He used the phrase, "That one landed wrong." He used the phrase, "I had nothing for it." He did not say he lost. He said something more specific than that. The certification appeared on the lower right of the monitor. Independent firm, no evidence of alteration, voice match confirmed against 3 separate reference samples. Trump said it was fabricated, manufactured, the product of a media apparatus that had been targeting him with increasing desperation as his dominance became undeniable. Colbert held up the certification report. Methodology on page 1. Conclusion on page 2. He did not read it aloud. He held it toward the camera for 7 seconds. A man near the center of the studio dropped his chin toward his chest and sat that way. A door near the production curtain opened. She was a former debate preparation consultant. 12 years in the field, 7 of them working within Republican campaign structures. She had worked 3 of the 7 cycles represented in the internal documents. Her testimony was procedural. Which sessions she had attended, what assessments had been produced. produced, on whose instruction those assessments had been classified as internal only and stripped from the post-cycle public record. Her voice did not shake, her hands were visible. She said she had arrived 2 hours early and spent 40 minutes in the building's ground floor cafe, going over her notes not because she needed them, but because the act of reviewing them made the act of being there feel sequential rather than sudden. She said it the way people say things that are true, but that they know will be used against them, with the calm of someone who has accepted the cost in advance. Trump called her a consultant with a grievance, a minor figure in a large machine who had mistaken proximity for significance. She waited for the description to finish. "I stayed quiet because staying quiet was the professional standard," she said. But the professional standard was protecting something that wasn't professional. She did not elaborate. She did not need to. The second witness came through the same door 1 minute and 40 seconds later. A man who had served as communications director for a PAC connected to 2 of the 3 election cycles in the internal documents. He had signed a non-disclosure agreement. He said so without drama. His voice held for 1 moment before the first sentence, the throat working, the jaw settling into place, the particular gathering of composure that is not performance, but preparation. He named the cycles. He named the specific internal ratings that had been reclassified between their original production and their archival status. He described the system by which debate performances that fell below the internal threshold were not deleted. Deletion left a record, but reclassified. Their categorical designations changed in the document management system so that future searches would not surface them under standard research queries. When Trump rose from his chair and said, "You are betraying every person who trusted you with this," the man did not step back. He looked at Trump with the stillness of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has just set it down. "They didn't buy my silence," he said. "They rented it, and the lease just expired." The audience did not cheer. One person, a man near the far right section, back row, brought his hands together, deliberately. The sound of it was specific, the way the sound of a single person clapping in a silent room is specific, each impact distinct. A second person joined, then a third, from a different quadrant of the studio, as if the response was not spreading through the crowd, but arriving independently in multiple places at once. The studio filled with it, not the explosion of an audience that has been given permission to react, but the slow gathering of an audience that has found, without direction, that stillness is no longer the right answer. Trump was still standing. His breathing was visible before it was audible, the chest rising at a rate that his posture was working, with some success, to conceal. His hands had moved from the desk to his sides and were not entirely still, a motion at the fingers that did not qualify as a tremor but that existed in the territory between intentional and not. His posture had undergone the compression that posture undergoes when the internal structure supporting it has been asked to bear more weight than it was built for. His eyes moved through the room, to the witnesses, to the screen, to Colbert, to the space behind the cameras, and settled nowhere. His jaw was set in the way jaws are set when the alternatives are worse. A thin line of perspiration had appeared at the hairline. It had not been attended to. He moved through denial first, fabricated, coordinated, a hit operation with institutional packaging. He moved to accusation. This had been planned, this was a setup, and his attorneys would be examining every element of the broadcast before morning. He arrived at bravado and held it the longest, the voice insisting that he had been through worse than this, that every institution that had tried to use documentation against him had failed, that he was still here and still dominant, and the record, the actual record, was unbroken. The screen changed for the last time. 2 columns. Left, the 7 internal assessments, the original ratings, the original categorical designations. Right, the same documents after reclassification, the ratings replaced with neutral administrative language, the categorical fields emptied and refilled with non-responsive classifications. The architecture of the 2 columns, the exact shape of what had been present in one version and absent in the other, the geometry of the removal, was the answer to the claim. Not an accusation, a comparison. Colbert looked at it, then at Trump. "The documents are on the table," he said. "The timeline is on the screen. The witnesses spoke." He paused. "Your move." Trump's mouth opened. A camera operator in position 2 held her lens on his face for 23 seconds as the silence extended and did not break into speech. The floor director at the back of the set had his headset in one hand, not on his head, having removed it at some point during the witness testimony, and not replaced it, standing with it held at his side, as if he had forgotten to complete a motion. Trump moved toward the corridor. He did not look at the witnesses. He did not look at Colbert. He moved with the momentum of someone whose direction has been decided by process of elimination, not by intention, but by the systematic removal of every other available option. Within 14 minutes, the first clip was live. Within 35, the broadcast had been cut into 9 independent segments, moving at different velocities through different platforms. The 2 columns, original documents and reclassified versions, were reproduced side by side on 3 network broadcasts without commentary, the comparison presented as its own sufficient argument. Anchors replayed the word architecture in a standalone loop, once, twice, a third time, and then let it sit in silence for a segment. Trump's counter-statements arrived in escalating sequence. The first measured, the second longer and louder, the third operating in the register of pure capital letters. Each statement was screenshot and placed beside the specific clip it was denying. Composed host on one side, escalating text on the other. The people who subscribe to this channel don't come for drama. They come for the moments nobody else is willing to show. Join them, subscribe, turn on notifications. The next truth is already on the table.